I think the first time we realised that it was an exciting project was when we had a press screening. And the reaction at the press screening was unlike anything else that I've been to. There was a real excitement about it, a buzz that there was something special that was going to engage on so many different levels. And also, the period drama didn't have a particularly hot reputation. In commercial terms, for example, ITV hadn't done any for years. The BBC had done Old Devils and Middlemarch, but Pride and Prejudice, the most popular Jane Austen's novels, just struck a chord. And when we saw the media reaction, we then knew that this was going to be a major hit.
All the previous dramatisations of Jane Austen had just been, I suppose, very Cranford-like. They'd sort of concentrated on the little details, and they'd always been about young ladies and gentlemen buttoned up to the neck, having polite conversations in wobbly sets, and I wanted to make it very out-of-doorsy and emphasise the physical aspect, that these people were bodies as well as minds, and find lots of opportunity for showing them doing energetic things like galloping horses and diving in lakes. I wanted to show him as a natural man, really, or taking the chance just not to be, a man in society with all his responsibilities, because it comes at a particular time. He's been in London for weeks, spending time with very boring, snobby people. He's ridden up to his family home where in a day's time he's got to host a big house party of these same rather dull, snobby people. And he's got a little bit of time for himself, just a little window of opportunity to just be on his own. And I thought, what would he do? Well, it's a blazing hot day. He's ridden all the way from London. There's his lake. What better than just to dive into it? So that's how it came about. I had no idea it was going to turn into, this kind of famous, sexy scene that all the women of England got so excited about. But it was a nice little scene. I thought of that, his conversation with Elizabeth afterwards. I knew it would be quite a funny scene, but I thought it would be mostly about social embarrassment, these two people having a very polite and stilted conversation and completely ignoring the fact that one of them is soaking wet from head to foot. But somehow women seem to respond to it in a very special way, and still do.
Mr. Darcy?
Miss Bennet?
I did not expect to see you, sir. We understood all the family were from home, or we should never have presumed.
I returned a day early. Excuse me, your parents are in good health?
Yes. They are very well. Thank you, sir.
I'm glad to hear it.
The scene where Colin goes into the lake. How dare he? No, goes into the lake and then emerges dripping wet. And, that created a big stir. I mean, I think that was maybe a front-page picture. I can't remember now, but it was big news. Very exciting, actor with his clothes on, dripping wet, shock, horror. I mean, really. But, of course, you had to put yourself in the perspective of Pride and Prejudice. Would he have done this? Would Mr. Darcy have done this in full view of Elizabeth Bennet? We don't think so, but it was great drama.
We had a great party, a sort of thank you from the controller of BBC One to all the cast and crew on Pride and Prejudice, just after Colin Firth got back from filming Nostromo in South America. So he had no idea that all this excitement around Darcy was going on. He had an inkling, but he had no idea until the location manager came up and told him he was a sex god, and did he have any idea what that meant? And he was absolutely bemused by it. This complete change, because he wasn't known for playing romantic leads. And because he'd been away in Cartagena shooting Nostromo, he'd been isolated from all the media frenzy. He'd done his work before. But to come back and be faced with pages and pages of Darcy mania must have been an extraordinary experience for him.
In the first half, the book was easy. Everybody seems to be in roughly the same place. Jane Austen actually writes some beautiful scenes with lots of dialogue in them. And in a way, I felt it was easy as well as a pleasure to adapt the first three the episodes, the first half of the book. Then everybody buggers off to different parts of the country and writes each other letters in the second half.
To Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
We had this very important letter that Darcy writes to Elizabeth, in which he's explaining why he's been like he is, and he tells the whole story of his dealings with Mr. Wickham, which has got the story of Georgiana, and he also explains, why he's not too pleased about allowing himself to Elizabeth's family. He starts it all dressed up and takes all night writing it. I finish with him the next morning and he's just in his vest. And when he's talking about Wickham, I reverse the order of things in the letter, and Jane Austen starts off with the family and then goes on to Wickham. But I thought he could start with Mr. Wickham. And then we flash back into that story. So in a way, I'm creating the character of Georgiana for the readers, because she hardly appears in the story at all. And so we were able to give Emilia Fox her first part on television. And she was just so lovely and ravishing. And of course, when you see her, you immediately start sympathising with her and completely changing your attitude to Wickham. So that kind of worked. So I told all that Wickham start, finished it up with Darcy in his vest, then cut to Elizabeth when Darcy is talking about the behaviour of her mother and her sisters at the ball. Elizabeth remembers those scenes, and so we flash back to them as well, but in quite an exaggerated way, so that her mother appears almost like a kind of cartoon character, and Lydia seems to be, like impossibly sort of Beryl the Perillish, sort of charging round and being impossibly noisy and vulgar and flirty. We kind of knew pretty well that we'd done a good show, and that all the performances, and especially the lead performances, had been very good. But we still thought we were appealing to very much of a niche audience, the kind of people who'd probably read the book and loved it already. Just the standard classic serial audience, well-educated, middle-aged to elderly, most of them. So it was a great surprise when it got this, 10 to 12 million audience, which really put it into very popular, hit show category.
It engaged across every demographic, male, female, young, old. It didn't matter. It was a fantastic romance story. It was about the class divide. It was of its time and yet contemporary. So it engaged on so many different levels. And it was also the classic phrase now, water cooler talk. So people were talking about it in the office the next day. 11 million people were watching it every week, and that built as well. So there was a real interest in the latest shenanigans with Darcy and Elizabeth. And because it was spread over 6 weeks, it gave people a chance to actually build up the loyalty with the series, which you never get with a single film or a two-parter.